Hello and welcome back. You are listening to Conscious Quest, the podcast for seekers. I am one of your hosts, Sarah Parlow, and this is going to be quite the episode. We are going to talk about how we can rewrite our own family story. I would love to start this off with a quote from one of my favorite authors, and she is a shame and vulnerability researcher by the name of Brené Brown. And the quote goes something like this: When we deny our stories, they define us. When we own our stories, we get to write a brave new ending. So, family dynamics are hard. No one is given an instruction manual on how to run a perfect family system. Most of it is really trial and error. But as adults, we can reflect back on our family experiences and observe how they affected each of us and determine what would serve us best going forward. Thus, by owning our family stories, we have the ultimate power to write a brave new ending. In honor of rewriting our family stories, today I'm giving you the most intimate glimpse of my life that I can. I'm inviting my own family on to the podcast today. In just a moment, you are going to meet my sister Jamie, and we're going to talk about how we can use the tools that we have as adults in order to upgrade the things we learned when we were children. Stay tuned, you don't want to miss this.
Welcome to Conscious Quest, the LA-based podcast where we aim to stay conscious about everything current.
Oh, hey there.
Hey, sister. It's so good to be here.
So happy you're here. Look who we have. Everyone, I want to introduce to all of you my sister, Jamie Crispin. And just to give you a little background about her, she has spent most of her professional career supporting youth development and national service. She is a AmeriCorps alum, a returned Peace Corps volunteer, and is currently the youth programs manager in the public sector. She believes in the power of taking risks and leading with compassion and curiosity. She currently lives in Kansas City, Missouri, and passionately supports the Kansas City Chiefs, whether they win or lose. And in her free time, you can find her chasing her sons, August and Abel, hiking, or watching an 80s movie with her dog, Roma. So, just as a little surprise, we're going to throw up on the screen here a photograph of your dog Roma at daycare. Everyone, I want you to look at this and see what this woman does to her dog. I mean, what is going on here?
Oh my gosh, let's see how much I love my dog and how much fun she's having and living her best life.
She definitely looks really happy in that. We are a crazy family. We like to have fun. We are incredibly silly. And so I just wanted to really, introduce this part of my life. And I love my sister so much. She's been one of my biggest supporters in life. So happy to have you on the show, Jamie.
Thank you for the invitation, and the feeling is certainly mutual. Sarah, you've always been such a great role model and an amazing sister to me. So it's truly my pleasure and my honor to be part of this podcast with you.
All right, well, let's get into it. So everyone, what I really love about my sister is her big heart. She's very just people-centered. She always has been in life. I mean, I learn a lot of lessons from her in that respect. And she's got a skill in working with others. She's always so just team-oriented, and she just functions incredibly as a leader. And then what's impressed me about her as an adult was to see how she raises her two boys. And so, Jamie, first question, can you tell us what it's like to be a boy mom and the values that you instill in your children as they grow up?
Oh, well, what it's like to be a boy mom. There's so many answers that I can give. And for anybody listening who is a boy mom, I know you're going to feel me on this. Every day is a surprise, every day is an adventure. And the beautiful thing about being a boy mom is really understanding that these young boys are going to grow into men, and to understand that what I am teaching or showing or talking to them about now is really going to form who they are, but also how they are in relationship with other men and other females. And so I take a lot of responsibility in parenting by values. And those are values that I established or decided were values. And so a couple of the things that we say a lot to ourselves is that Crispins are courageous and kind. And I reinforce that through just saying that out loud verbally. Also, when I see that they do something kind, I will say to them, that was really great. That was something very kind. And that's one of our values. Or when they're scared to try something new or to start, on a new team and going to practices, I'll say to them, Crispins are courageous. And being courageous means we have to get out there and try new things, or we have to put ourselves out there. And so I really try to build a framework and to reiterate our values, not only with the words that we use, but in our actions. I'll say another thing about being a boy mom, besides feeling responsible and setting their mindsets the right way, is that I'm also very cautious about their bodies or having autonomy over their bodies. And so in my household, no means no. That means if we are tickling and one of the boys says no, it stops. And I'm really firm about that. And those boys even reiterate it, no means no. The other thing is when we are saying goodbye to either family, friends, or even just new folks that we've met, I always give my boys options about, you can give high fives or hugs, and I let them decide, how they're feeling, what are they comfortable with, and being able to engage, that they have that decision making. I feel really strongly about that and really want to reinforce that. So the other thing I'll land on to wrap up this question is being a boy mom is such a blessing, and it has really opened and warmed my heart in so many ways. The bond that I have with my boys, August and Abel, is so strong and it is so beautiful. We don't mind being vulnerable. We don't mind about having emotions or crying. And we talk about things openly about, it seems like you're angry. Here are some options and how do you express your anger? Do you need alone time? Do you need a hug? And we really work hard to talk through it together as a unit, and letting them know that I love them and that I want to nurture their development, and that I'll always be there for them, on the good days and the bad days. So again, being a boy mom is an adventure. You never know what's going on, but you also have to be very intentional about what you're saying to them and what you're teaching them.
Well, this is all Jamie in a crystallized nutshell, just like giving this beautiful model to her children, and to see her as a mother and blossom in that role has been so incredibly rewarding. I love the way that she approaches allowing for young boys to have access to feelings and to develop and grow into the healthy masculine. Because I do feel like historically, young boys were denied a lot of those opportunities. And so all of that has far-reaching ramifications. So thank you for raising your young boys the right way, sister.
Thank you.
I will say, over the years, we've shared a lot of common values. You've been an incredible supporter of diversity in a lot of ways. And, I'm just curious, like, where do you think this came from when you consider the fact that we all grew up in a fairly sheltered, white, suburban Catholic upbringing in smaller town, Midwestern Pennsylvania.
Absolutely. And I'll share that for me diversity is not just race and ethnicity. It really is thinking about geographic space and thinking about ability levels as well as thinking about, gender and sexual orientation. And, I believe wholeheartedly that probably one of the main factors was, Sarah, your transition and transitioning and, talking about it with our family. I think that what I realized is that although the external world may have feelings about folks that are transgendered or transitioning, I had a very different perspective and a very different story because you were my sister and I could see the evolution, from, I guess, a front row kind of place. And it made me think to myself, what other stories don't I know? Or what
Mm.
other generalizations am I feeding into and not taking time to see the individual? And Sarah, from the struggle and the transition that you went through, I really sought out folks that maybe weren't mainstream or the popular ones. Like, I really wanted to know everyone's story. And when I was going on adventures when I was younger, I seem to have always made friends and been an ally for folks who maybe identified as LGBTQIA and really spent time to understand their stories. And with that, it was just this beautiful world opening up, a bond, a connection, and then knowing that I was wrong about some things and
Mm.
reframing the narrative, reframing my brain about what biases am I carrying and do I want to continue them? And so it was really this beautiful process and kind of self-learning for me, but then the ability that I could have this broader awareness and make friends no matter where I went. And so I believe that that has really set me forward in my professional career as well as my personal life. And the last thing I'll say is, for me as an individual, I'm just inherently curious. And I appreciate that you've noted my big heart, Sarah, and I really enjoy people. And so I think for me, I know that I can learn more if I listen and ask really good questions. And so pairing, your evolution with maybe my personality and kind of what I already bring to the table, it's really made me seek out and understand people that don't look like me.
And her curiosity has served her well in life. My sister, you don't know her very much yet, but I remember her late teens to early to mid 20s. Just she was always off finding opportunities across the country, across the world, in order to broaden her worldview. And I always just felt so much love and passion and admiration for how much she was willing to take in. And so it ended up in the woman you see before you. And she is, I feel she's a
Mhm.
national treasure. I might be slightly biased, but you're all just going to have to deal with that.
That's
Um,
right. Hmm.
Thank you for bringing up the aspect of my influence in your life of having transitioned. I just want to touch on that a little bit. I shared with my audience in the past that I was 19 at the time. And so I think back to the moment when I shared with you, and I think you were probably around 16. And
Hmm.
so one of the gifts that comes with getting older is that we can step outside of ourselves, and I was
Hmm.
so laser focused on moving forward in my own life out of need and somewhat desperation
Hmm.
at that moment, that I don't feel I often took in like how much was happening around me. And so now as an adult, I just want to say, I'm available to talk about like, what was that like for you at, that sort of really fundamental age of like 16, because I do believe that what trans people can offer the world is healing.
Hmm.
And so like, how can we go back to these moments and rewrite this story in a way that is inclusive and loving and healing. So I'll hand that question off to you.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I appreciate all the accolades, but I just want to honor Sarah, the woman that you are today. It's really remarkable for me, who's a cisgendered white woman, to sit across from you, Sarah, and you asked me how your announcement of transition was for me. I feel like really it's probably more important that we hear from you, and so I appreciate the turning of the tables, and you know, in that moment, I'll set the stage, and then Sarah, I'd love for you to share out when I'm done. You know, I was about 15, 16. Sarah was home on winter break, in between college, and I was in my room, which I shared with my younger sister Jen. And Sarah knocked on the door and said, "Could I come in?" And I said, "Of course." And I'm not entirely sure what else happened, except this is all I remember, was Sarah saying, "I've decided to live as a woman." And in that moment, I knew it was a huge shift. I knew that it was monumental. I knew that this was really hard and tough. Woo, Sarah and I both agreed neither one of us was going to get through this without crying.
I brought
It took us
tissues.
yeah, same here. But in that moment, I knew it was big. I knew it was big, even in my 15, 16-year-old brain. And Sarah, I don't know if you remember, and I don't know everybody else's reaction, but I just grabbed you and I said, "I love you." And you, I think you said it back, or, you know, we kind of, you know, untangled from the hug, and you went out the room and shut the door. And I just was like, that was big. Like, that was big. Like, that's all that I can think of. But in that moment, I didn't have questions. I just knew that it was a challenge, and that it was something that was so important to you, and that it was going to really, you know, from your soul, cause you to have to really transform. And all I could offer in that moment was just, you know, a hug and love. And so it was a very authentic response, you know, and it was very quick. You know, people always ask, "Well, how did she tell you?" And it was a very quick moment. But I remember, like I said, I felt like it was a moment that would be ingrained in my heart forever, because it was so, I knew it was so important, and it was a very powerful moment.
Well, thank you for sharing that moment with me. um,
Mm-hmm.
so, in, thank you for sharing that. And, you
Mm-hmm.
know, just so that the audience is aware, we haven't really had these discussions before. You know, this is
Correct.
really about pulling back these layers and really like talking, you know,
Mm-hmm.
30 years later as adults.
Right.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
because you know how things happen in families, like things happen and you just keep going. And sometimes we don't ever really process or digest these things. Um, so to hear her say, you know, you're asking me about my viewpoint now. You know, to hear her say that she knew it was big, you know, and could recognize the gravity of it, like that she was aware at that age of like how much, you know, this was going to affect and empower me, and is pretty profound. I remembered having to tell everybody individually, and like
Mm-hmm.
Jamie said, to echo that, it was over Christmas break, after my first semester in college, and I literally had left Erie with the intention of moving to a bigger city that had access to care. And that's
Mm-hmm.
actually why I chose to go to the school that I did, is because I knew I needed to seek out, you know, what we call gender affirming care these days.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so coming home on Christmas, it was like I couldn't, like, you know, not share this anymore. And it is a scary moment to walk into, knowing that
Mm-hmm.
you are bearing your soul to someone that you've grown up with, and really sharing like very vocally, like very personal things that you're essentially trying to resolve. Um, I do remember how much you received it so well. I do remember like there wasn't any hesitation from you. Um, and I just remember like feeling relief, but also feeling overwhelmed. And I think that's why I kind of had to leave.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Um, so, I guess just to be clear, like at that age, I don't know if I was the best at educating and articulating a lot of what was happening or the trans experience. I think that my goal was really to lead by example and hope that it would just really make sense to everybody in the family at that
Right.
time. Um, I can speak from, my perspective, and Jamie, I'd love to hear your opinion, but like
Mhm.
most families, there weren't always the most direct communication patterns. We're
Mhm.
East European by background, which is not an ethnicity known for like touchy feely.
Right. Mhm.
So, yeah, just I think we were just our personalities would rub up against each other, like growing up in the house, and then we get
Mhm.
annoyed with each other, go away, and then come back, and there was never really discussion or dialogue. So, um,
Right.
I don't know if you wanted to speak to any of that too.
Yeah, I think, our family was always supportive,
Mhm.
and we knew it maybe through nonverbal communication, maybe more than verbal
Yeah,
communication. And I think that we weren't always great at conflict. And, I'm not always great at conflict to this day. And so when there were stressful moments or difficult times, it seemed like the pattern or the norm was to disassociate from the situation and those individuals.
yeah,
And in a hour or a day we would come back together and just never talk about the conflict or the issue. And that was kind of how we navigated and moved through things. And you know I'm just saying that as what I remember, looking back, and I'm not trying to assign any judgment or say that it was good or bad. I just realized that that was kind of the pattern that existed with our communication style in our family.
right.
And yeah, and you know I think too, Sarah, I think about that communication style and how challenging it must have been for you to want to be your authentic self and want to be powerful and to feel worthy and to not have any guilt or shame. And I would imagine that our family dynamics around communication probably just really didn't lend themselves
Yeah.
to an environment that would allow you to maybe to speak freely. And I wouldn't say that there's a lot of need for you to have to educate and aware, because I think that's a lot for somebody in a marginalized group to have to claim that banner. But I also realize the struggles that our family communication have had on me as a woman, an adult woman. I'm now divorced and realized a lot through that process that there were definitely some tendencies to avoid or be passive aggressive. But I think for you in those pivotal years when you were moving through this transition, I'm wondering how our that family communication style, you know, might have hurt you in some ways.
I think you said two very key words in your answer, and that was guilt and shame. And
Mm-hmm.
and so our upbringing was Catholic. My parents were both Catholic, and we went to Catholic school. And and so also to give background for listeners, like everybody in our family was like white, Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
married with kids. One of our aunts was a nun for a while, but then got married. So there was
Mm-hmm.
there was a homogeneity that existed.
Mm-hmm.
And So I think as I was growing up and recognizing these things about myself again at an early age, and no one wanted to sort of acknowledge or talk about it, well, then I just internalized it of like, okay, well, I'm the problem. And I realized also when I came out, I'm sure it was like a bomb going off in my family. Like we didn't really have any out gay people in our family.
Right.
There was no sort of, well-worn pathway for me to go on. And I think the hardest part was just, I think, the lack of discussion.
Right.
And then I'm also navigating through this religious piece of like,
Correct.
by certain Christian dogma, I'm violating certain Christian, layperson dogma. So I think I often saw that as this is my problem, and I will give some flowers to my family in this way. All of you gave the space for me to exist in that. You used my pronouns. You called me Sarah. And specifically, I just really need to recognize like the first person to do it in our family was our dad, which I know had to be hard considering like his very traditional, staunch Catholic background. He was the first one I felt that set the tone. And I have to say, like, I don't remember him ever slipping up on my name or pronouns after that. He could have, I just really don't remember it. So in that respect, I thought it was really progressive how our family was showing up at that time, even though there wasn't a whole lot of direct and face-to-face communication about it. I always had this sort of haunting feeling, though, that it was really all my fault and that it was my issue I had to take care of. There wasn't the same understanding then as there was now of gender dysphoria is real. It doesn't go away. Gender affirming care is the only way to alleviate gender dysphoria. And specifically, today there is reimbursement by insurance for care and procedures and everything. All of that really fell on the individual back 30 years ago. And so I just felt like the whole world saw everything that I did as cosmetic and not as like affirming and life-saving and liberating. And I think because I was operating outside the norms of our family history, outside the norms of our, religious understanding, that, this was something I was supposed to carry and not bother people too much with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Sarah, I don't remember the exact dates, but you said 30 years ago, and the resources that are available now, even just to educate, to bring awareness, to give best practices of how to navigate as a family or an individual, or did not exist back in the day. I mean, I think I'm still thinking AOL with that startup dial-up noise, like people were still
Yeah.
all about chat rooms, like we didn't have the internet, like we were still looking at encyclopedias to like research at some point, and so it was really the only way for us to process or to understand would have been to direct communication, because we didn't know where else to go. And I think, that's one of the things, and I'll share this, is the night, Sarah, and I think I told you this, that after you shared with all of us individually about your transition, my little sister and I shared a room together, Jen. And so we sat, in our twin beds talking, what does this mean? What are we going to have to, because I'm not sure we knew that your new name would have been Sarah at that point, or I feel like we were like, how do we address her? What are we supposed to tell our friends? Like there were questions that, I was 15, 16. So Jen must have been, 11, 12. We didn't have answers to, but we were trying to process it out as sisters together. And so I think as hard, if it was hard for me, we didn't, I really had to seek out information as I got older. And, for you, I think you were a trailblazer in some ways, for our family, and then having to try to be our authentic self, as well as trying to educate us. I think the other flowers I would give, our mother has passed away, but I remember mom in her support. She was taking you to appointments. She was doing everything she could to make sure you were comfortable, that you had things that you needed. And although it seemed a little secretive on our part, we didn't always know where you were going or why. And I understand, why that wasn't out there. But I remember mom was the one driving you and taking you places and, went with you for, your, with your, to you for your transition. And she really stood by you. As much as dad, used the right pronouns, I know that mom was that silent support, that you could lean on.
And so, first of all, I just want to thank you for bringing up Anne Marie.
Mhm.
And I really want to dedicate this episode to her because, of course, we wouldn't be here without her. And
Mhm.
I just really want to recognize that for anyone out there who has a trans kid, she embodied how you care for your trans child, even though she didn't understand it all. And how could
Right.
she?
Right.
She knew that the alternative would be to lose me,
You're right.
and she did
Mhm.
everything that she could within her power, within her realm of understanding, in order to support me in that. And she didn't always get it right. I don't care
Mhm.
about that. Um,
Right.
I and I just really want to point out as well that you mentioned AOL, like really the internet wasn't truly available
Right.
widespread at this
Mhm.
time, and we easily forget how much information is readily available to us today.
Mhm.
Um, she understood that this was so integral to my existence that it um, that this is what I needed to in order to survive. And I really do want to take
Right.
just a moment to point out, like, whatever people think about trans people,
Mhm.
this is not people living out their sexual fantasies. This
Right.
is not about exhibitionism. This is not about, like, this would be fun to
Mhm.
do. I really want to point out, like, the gut wrenching, like,
Right.
aspects of, like, I understood the impact of me casting off these social
Mhm.
norms and the social expectations, and yet I couldn't survive any other way. I was
Right.
aware enough to know that life doesn't happen in a vacuum. I took none
Mhm.
of it lightly, but I knew that I would not survive if I did
Right.
not step
Mhm.
into the frequency that would allow me to show up in the world. I operate through the feminine. I always have operated through the feminine. And when we
Right.
demonize aspects of people, that's when all the guilt and shame comes
Right.
in, and then
Right.
nobody wins.
Right.
So I see that
Mhm.
while my transition was, for me, I hope also within this family container that it can demonstrate like that evolution as a soul happens
Mhm.
not in isolation, but it happens in groups, in process, because all of you had to evolve. And you all evolved to your own degree that you felt comfortable with that, but
Mhm.
you all had to evolve along with me. And so whatever
Mhm.
you believe spiritually, I do believe we come to this earth with plans and contracts, and this, I think, was all of our family contract. So,
Agree. Yeah, absolutely. And, honestly, you know, Sarah and I have been very vulnerable with each other. We've shared, a lot of tears, a lot of laughter, a lot of memories. And, I know the struggles intimately. Obviously, I am a cisgendered individual, but, Sarah's always been very honest and authentic with me, and it is, you use the word gut wrenching, and it is heartbreaking too. I think some of the, whether it's listening to your dating stories, listening to that when you do actually, come out, people sexualize the process for you and want to know, intimate details. Even hearing about how you might authentically share with a friend and maybe they feel differently all of a sudden. I think also just, what is the right amount of disclosure and when? And those are all things for me as a cisgendered woman, I don't have to think about. And so, you sharing all that has really made me understand the struggle and the depth of what it means to be a trans person. And I guess in some ways we're lucky that we're Americans and that you have some freedoms. And I understand the landscape politically right now. So I use freedom, I guess, with quotes in some ways, but, I had no idea. And even the fact of me thinking about me getting married or my sisters being married, how that could make you feel, Sarah, or, me having children. And you were always so great to celebrate those moments with me, but then also understanding how it could feel from your perspective. And I think if without you sharing and being open with me and just like telling me like, this is why it sucks, I'm not sure I'd be able to be the best sister or the best ally for you and your community if you would not have opened up. And so I think that's an important cross that I want to always bear. And formally and informally, I try to be an advocate of you and your community because, you're
doing it right now.
Yeah. Right. But there isn't a lot of awareness, and what awareness exists is very much formed by, media or, what people believe is the trans experience. And so I think it's just really important that I want to note that you made me a better person. I never would have wanted you to struggle or to, have to take on this journey. But if this was our contract, before we got on this planet, then I'm happy to walk alongside you with it. And, being able to do this podcast is one small way, Sarah, that I could show up for you.
I will point out how excited my sister was and enthusiastic about this. When I brought up the idea, I was really like, I don't want to put her in this position, but at the same time, you brought up the political landscape. We'll touch on that in a second. I don't want to put you in that sphere or anything like that, but unless people who are not trans are standing up in solidarity with us, then it's easy for us to get steamrolled. And the issue is that when trans people are steamrolled and that we have our bodily autonomy stripped away from us and the ability to make choices about our own lives and healthcare, well, then everybody's choices around their lives and healthcare are in peril. And that is why it is important to support trans people. So it's been a very, intense couple of years regarding politics in this country. And I've opened up to you a lot about that. And I've done other talks on the podcast about that. What is your understanding about that and why that is happening in the United States right now?
Yeah, I'll start off with that. I'm sad that I don't have a lot of peers or friends that are really talking about these issues unless they maybe identify as LGBTQIA. There isn't a lot of awareness, I think, in the general population about some of the legislation that is extremely harmful to trans individuals and the community as whole. And, I'm really saddened by this. I think as somebody who's studied sociology and is a proclaimed feminist, I definitely have feels about social institutions and who has the power and control. I'm really saddened that, trans folks seem to be on the political agenda. I think, honestly, it's happening because it's a population that's so misunderstood, that folks are very biased. And I am also really disheartened that a lot of times the conversation is really about taking away care, or especially taking away care for youth and for children. And there's a lot of contention around there. So I think, I think it's misunderstanding where people are afraid and therefore not asking questions. I think as well as it not being on the kind of the mind of the general population, I think one of the things that I would give advice about is for if you have somebody in your family who's trans or a good friend or a coworker is to take ownership of getting education. And one of the things that Sarah had shared with me early on was Erin in the Morning, which is, I believe she's a political strategist and focuses on trans issues and may identify as trans herself. And so I subscribe to these wonderful emails. And so am continuously learning more and more every day as the political landscape changes about the legislation, what's moving forward, what's not, and kind of what are the issues. And that has really helped me be able for you, Sarah, to support you, to communicate with you and to say, I saw this is really devastating, or to, just be able to let Sarah know, I saw it. This is awful. I'm thinking of you. How's your community? And so that's one thing I would add in about looking for those outlets and doing your own research so you can support folks who are feeling attacked right now.
Thank you so much. That is such an
Mhm.
incredible answer. And, Erin in the Morning is a tremendous resource. She reports on the political landscape for trans people. I'll have her link in the show notes. I think there are also some good stories that she shares too.
Mhm.
We talk a lot about gender affirming care and the bans happening against them. The interesting thing is like studies have come out showing like without question that, the vast majority, we're talking like 98% of people
Mhm.
who access gender affirming care have had improvement, a little or a lot. Generally, like, 94% or 84% saying a lot better improvement in
Mhm.
their lives. And I
Mhm.
would love to hear, like, we're talking about a lot of the barriers and the difficulty. I also feel like it's very important to point out, like, how do you feel transition affected my life, aside from
Mhm.
all the struggles and everything? And there are struggles. I'm not going to lie, especially 30 years ago. But could you compare for people like who I was
Mhm.
before versus today?
Yeah. I'll say that thinking of Sarah before the transition, and I'm going to use, she, her pronouns and speaking of this, Sarah was maybe socially withdrawn, maybe enjoyed spending, some time alone, definitely loved to read, loved watching movies. I would say that Sarah enjoyed being around my friends or my sister Jen's friends a lot, but that maybe we didn't welcome a lot of friends that Sarah had in our childhood. And so she kind of adopted our friends. I could also, I had always seen maybe some more of the feminine energy in Sarah growing up. We shared in, playing dolls together or doing dress up together and things like that. And so, it seemed very normal for me. And I loved it because I had, a counterpart and playing these things. But I would think traditionally, there are, younger boys that maybe would be doing some other kind of more masculine tasks. And so I think that's what I remember Sarah before. And maybe you haven't talked about this, Sarah, but I was aware that you were bullied. And I know that that was very hard and challenging. Absolutely. And it broke my heart. And so seeing Sarah after transition, she's the happiest, most joyful person. She's very confident. Obviously, she's gorgeous and beautiful, but always willing to work on herself internally because she loves to have a great sense of well-being and peace, and she's very extroverted now, I would say, even though I know, Sarah, you probably enjoy having some time to unprocess, but also too she's very caring and wants to be around people. And I don't I can't imagine my sister any other way than the way that she presents and is right now. And I absolutely believe that the transition was the best thing for you, Sarah, for your mind, body, soul. And for you to be this person that you always should have been, but definitely you needed to have the inside, look like the outside for you to be able to just grow and transform into the beautiful person you are now.
Oh, thank you so much for that, sister. Thank you for being
Mhm.
my witness. Thank you for saying those
Mhm.
wonderful things. I love you so much.
Mhm.
Um, I also want people to know a little bit more about you. And I think we skipped over this a little earlier, but one of my
Sure.
questions I had is, you know, for you being such a supporter of diversity, like what experiences beside me do you think were so instrumental for you as a young adult and shaping your worldview and just your curiosity and your just zest for life because you really do, you take it all in.
I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is my time in AmeriCorps, National Civilian Community Corps, or NCCC. For folks who aren't aware of national service, it's the program that I did was a team-based residential program for 10 months where I was the leader and had 10 other of my peers with me. And we traveled around the United States doing short-term volunteer projects. And so those I 10 months were instrumental to not only me understanding the leader that I could become, but as well as understanding that there are people all over this country that don't look like me. And that's okay. And it's wonderful. And there's so much culture everywhere that it's better to enjoy it than to ask to judge it. And so in AmeriCorps and
Mm.
CCC, I was in Alabama and built houses. I worked on the Appalachian Trail, cutting new trails. I was in Miami doing taxes, as well as in South Carolina working with, inner city kids in a summer camp. So all of these really shaped me on top of as well as trying to organize a team, trying to keep people happy, healthy, and successful. And it was through that and really a lot of feedback from my team where I realized, there's a lot of control I have to give up. I have to really think about how do I empower people. I have to think about how do
Mm.
I inspire and be compassion, but also set boundaries and allow people to fail, but also try, to ensure that they're accountable when things do go, in a different direction. So, highly recommend anybody joining AmeriCorps, but that to me when I was 25, I did that when I was 25, and that really set the tone for the rest of my life.
I do remember this time vividly, and just Jamie would literally finish one activity and be on to the next in some other
Yep.
city, just doing these
Yep.
incredible things. And if we could just promote for everybody out there just the value of travel and
Mhm.
getting outside your bubble and getting involved with community. And
Mhm.
Jamie is the person in my life that exemplifies this the most. And as you can see, just the value it's brought to her and to our whole family because this is unprompted, but to me, after the loss of my mother, Jamie is the heart of
Mhm.
our family now. She
Oh.
represents that connection point for all of us because in life that duty falls to whoever has the container, who has the depth and in order to do that, and my sister has that, and we are so blessed to have her. It's so beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
um
Mhm.
we have talked a lot, we've shed some tears today. I feel
Yeah.
really really there's a few things I want to touch upon. um this is all about healing and writing a brave new ending for our family story. Um, what have you learned from our family systems experience growing up, and how are you employing that or a different system
Yeah.
within your own family now?
Mhm. The one thing, like I said, is our family, we all really did support each other. And I really carry that to my family circle with my boys. I think what I add on is the opportunity to have discussions, even if it's hard stuff. I have a 9 and a 6-year-old, and when they ask me stuff like, one of them asked them about what's the Trail of Tears, Mom? And I'm like, okay, we're talking about the decimation of Native Americans. Okay, here we go. I try really hard to respond in an age appropriate way, but I want to paint a picture of and give them the truth. So I really do allow my boys to try to form their own decisions. I really want them to know that I support them, formally, informally, vocally, not vocally. And so it's really about building that culture of love and being able to be open and accessible and transparent as much as their age will allow.
On the other side of that, what do you feel like you learned from our own family systems experience growing up?
Yeah, I would say, as a professional, I really tell myself I am good at communicating. I can manage people and supervise them and coach them and inspire them. And I have tough conversations all the time. But something really had to be untied in personally and in relationships, because I think that the way that I grew up in our family communicating, I wasn't handling conflict, and that I was trying to avoid it and wasn't talking and going through the hard conversations. And so as a adult, that's something that I really try to do, is to be aware of my emotions, name them, and then ask for what I need, as well as it's okay to say no. I think we're, as women, but also I think in our family, we were very much about comfort and, making sure somebody else was comfortable, people pleasing. And that has taken me years and years to untangle. And so for me, saying no is okay. And it's fine, but also communicating my needs and knowing my boundaries.
Right. And so I really want to point out, like, our family was so good at providing, right? And having like the home and having the education. And, mom cooked all the time. And when it comes to these other things like communication, when we learned to do better, we did do better. But that's a choice as adults. Because again, life and family systems don't always come with a manual. And that's not to point fingers or anything. It's just to have an awareness of like, okay, this is what we knew then. And then how can we take our knowledge now and determine how our life should be going forward? And I just really am so happy how you answered that, and how you can demonstrate for everyone listening that yes, we can have a choice of how, we take what the gifts that we were given as a child and take it even further. One of my last questions is, do you want to share why you agreed to do this podcast?
Yeah. Well, I have always wanted to be on a podcast. Always, always. So the dream come true for sure. And I think the bonus is that I get to do this with you, Sarah, who, is my beautiful sister. But honestly, I had asked Sarah, in talking about some of the issues that are going about with the trans community, I had asked her, is there something I can do? And, she said, would you be willing to come on the podcast? And I actually did immediately say yes. I didn't even have to think about it. But, in some ways, I want folks to know that, for that it's so important to be an ally for somebody that is struggling in life, and whether it's somebody about gender or sexual orientation, whether we're talking about people of color, marginalized groups, anything like that. If you're a family member, there is a responsibility and a duty that you have. And I think it's so important that we reach out to say, how are you? Are you doing okay? What can I do for you? And what can you do in the community, and just educating yourself. And I think that's it, where Sarah, I love you and I support you. But I think this was another way of support that I was willing to do. And it's, something that I hope is because I love you. I guess is really the main reason why I wanted to do the podcast.
And I am your older sister, so there is
That's
that.
right.
But I
Mhm.
also want to point out, like, it's no small undertaking. It takes a lot of courage, and it takes vulnerability, and it requires you to show up and be available. And not everybody can do that, and I understand that. But folks, when someone does in your life, you know, just I can only wish that I could project how I feel right now by being seen and being carried by my sister, and hope to do the same for her in every way that I can in life. Lastly, do you have any final thoughts or takeaways you want to share? It could be something fun and non-related, but I want to throw it out there.
Yeah, I mean, this is what came to my heart, and so you can edit this out later. One thing that I always tell my sister Sarah is that I have all the faith in the world that she is going to find an amazing partner who is going to love her just as she is. And I know that that is something that you have wanted for a really long time. You do all the internal work. You're always putting yourself out there, and so that's one thing I just wanted to put out into the ether in the universe, that I hold that vision of love for you in my heart and my soul, because I know it's going to happen for you. But that I'll never give up, and I know you'll never give up. And then, if there's a partner out there listening, please contact my sister Sarah.
Folks, I did not pay her to say that. I swear to God.
Mm-hmm.
But she did speaketh it into existence. So
Just
I'm
saying.
here for it. And who knows? Maybe one day I too will have that partner and a dog that I will torment in daycare with photographs. One more time, here's our photo of Roma. She's loving this so much.
Look, she is loving life. Look how happy she
She's loving
is.
it. Okay. Lastly, everyone, I want to share that I am making a difficult choice to have this be the last episode of the season for the podcast. I need some time to regroup and focus on my acting and writing and life coaching. And I will, keep everybody informed when we are back with new content, and to keep everything going and keep helping you to stay conscious in your own life. But I also recognize the need for rest in my own life sometimes, which is hard for me to admit. I can't do everything all the time. So either way, I felt like this was a slam dunk episode to end our season with. I am so grateful for all of you listening, and to my sister, who just killed it today, and I couldn't be more proud of her, and I love her so much. So thank you for being here, Jamie.
Thank you for being you, Sarah.
And we'll see you next season, everybody. And until then, stay conscious.